Professor Peter Atkins, who is Professor of Chemistry at Oxford University and the author of 65 books, including 8 best-selling chemistry textbooks, which he also illustrates himself. Professor Atkins is a prominent atheist, and it's a pleasure to have you today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
But you see, that's laziness coming in again. And we will constantly come back to this laziness, because you say there's this complicated question, this very deep question. And the deep question in this case is why mathematics works as a description of nature. And you say, I'll just assert that there is a God behind it all. And that seems to me to be a terribly lazy way of approaching an explanation of the world. What I have to do as an atheist, as someone who does not see any evidence for God, is to say, can we get to the root of why mathematics works? And it's a real question, I don't deny that, and it's a wonderful question. And science is not yet able to answer it, but it is working towards it. So millimetre at a time, rather than taking this giant lazy leap to say, we won't understand why there is a mathematical description of the world, it must be a God. That seems to me to be the laziness in the extreme. Religions undermine respect for the only way of acquiring reliable information about the nature of the world. Religions encourage the pursuit of understanding by the contemplation of navels and the achievement of comprehension by adopting a variety of ways of stemming the flow of blood to the brain. They encourage scavenging hints about the nature of reality by the close analysis of those ancient, politically edited compilations of folk tales referred to as sacred texts. If you favour self-deception, then vote against the motion. If you consider that society is enhanced by honesty and by unbiased perception of the search for truth, then vote for the motion. Thirdly, religions undermine respect for evidence. Religions harm societies by disfavouring evidence in favour of faith, preferring mass hysteria, superstition, priestly authority, and the propagation of beliefs by cultural conditioning over controlled, careful, circumspect, public, unbiased inspection. If you consider that introspection and submission to authority mark the path to understanding, then vote against the motion. If instead you consider that truth is not arrived at by fanning the flames of a crowd's opinion, but by circumspect public scrutiny, then vote for the motion.
Point of information?
Take it.
Within Islam, there is a procedure to alter the text according to modern society, which relies on logical analogies that are drawn from the real world and a logical process that is followed to reach the conclusion. How then does it block logical interpretations of the world around us?
Thank you. All religions pride themselves on developing analogies, normally after the truth has been discovered by scientists. Now, I have to say, of course, that many people hold the view that the assertion that God made it, as we just heard, is far, far simpler as an explanation of everything than a more pedestrian account in terms of physical laws. God, they say, is surely a simpler explanation than complex mechanism. But don't be seduced by that view. The assertion that God did anything is simplistic rather than simple, and it is lazy. It is simplistic because an entity as functionally unbounded as a God must be of extraordinary complexity. And the shortness of a name does not imply the simplicity of an entity. It's lazy because it avoids becoming involved in untangling the web of events that have led to us. Any argument that simply asserts that God did it is a sign of a lazy mind, a mind that is content to wallow in assertion rather than embark upon climbing the intellectual Everest of comprehension. My argument against God, I hope he's not listening, is that there is nothing in the universe that cannot be explained, in prospect at least, without invoking that complex hypothesis. In other words, yes, use Occam's razor, cut it down, cut away all the accretions of theology, and let science speak for itself. In other words, There are simpler explanations, or at least the prospect of simpler explanations for absolutely everything. Because there are simpler explanations, or the prospect of them, and I admit that prospect of them is a weasel word, which I'll be happy to defend later, there is no need to burden our understanding with the assertion that there is something more, namely an incomprehensible God. And that billions of people believe the contrary is of no consequence. Truth is not arrived at by a majority vote. There are clearly huge psychological and cultural pressures imposed on people from an early age, and belief has been honed by the powerful into a potent weapon of crowd control. In the nasty, brutish brevity of an impoverished life, great comfort comes from the belief that there is better to come. That the scientific method can be applied to illuminate every real question, and sort of incidentally can reveal the emptiness of vacuous questions. I consider that the scientific method can be applied fruitfully to the elucidation of its traditional magisterium, not just the mechanism of the world, but also everything to do with its origin, composition, and ultimate fate. I also consider that science can illuminate, largely through psychology and physiology, the inclination of some to favor religions, and, of course, as we've been hearing, morality. It also has the power to identify vacuous musings, typical of theologies, such as the purpose of the universe and the nature of the afterlife.
Thank you very much. I'm Peter Atkins. I'm a defunct physical chemist. I'll talk first of all about the emergence of science. There are, in my view, three ways of understanding the deep nature of the world. One is the way that the Greeks did it, which is to sit around thinking about what the world should be like, and then creating a number of crazy ideas. Then the other way is to refer to books that purport to be authoritative, which were written by peasants about 2,000 years ago, and are regarded now as some kind of holy testament. And the third way, which really emerged about 300 years ago, is going out into the world and discovering what it is really like. That is, doing experiments. And in my view, the only secure way of acquiring knowledge about the nature of the world, its workings, and indeed everything about it, is that last one. There is no point in going back just thinking about what it should be like, and there is no point in listening to peasants. And I think you should listen to scientists. Now, humanity, in my view, should be extraordinarily proud of the fact that it simply stumbled on a way of discovering truth about the world. It's a perfectly obvious procedure, really, and it's amazing that, I suppose it's regrettable that because of the influence of the church that it took so long. It's surprising that it took until about the 17th century for mankind to realise that it was the way forward. The scientific method, in short, is going out, doing observations under controlled conditions, that is, doing experiments, and then thinking about the implications of those experiments, and most important of all, putting the theories that account for those observations into a reticulation of theories, so that you aren't just a single island of thought in biology, a single island of thought in physics or wherever. You are really part of a continent, an interconnected continent of ideas, a reticulation of ideas. And one of the signs that science is so powerful, and indeed, in my view, right, is that ideas flow from a variety of different sources, but unlike in religion, and indeed unlike in philosophy, I think, where they mingle, they are mutually supportive. So, in order to understand, for example, the large-scale structure of the cosmos, you need to understand the details of fundamental particle physics. In order to understand biology these days, you really do need to understand physics, chemistry, and biochemistry. So it is a great mutually supportive reticulation of concepts. And concepts don't damage their neighbours. They support their neighbours.
Religions, being founded on opinion rather than fact, propagate dangerous absurdities. Those absurdities quench individual aspiration and can encourage social harm. Take Buddhism, for instance, which propagates the absurdity of multiple, indeed infinite reincarnations, the progressive acquisition of enlightenment, and the danger of slipping back next time and becoming a toad, or even worse, a woman. Take Islam and its encouragement of terror and martyrdom by the false promise of a voluptuous afterlife. Religions that promise future bliss in a non-existent afterlife inhibit an individual's fulfillment in this one and only life. If you consider that it is politically appropriate to exercise crowd control by the peddling of false promises, then vote against the motion. If you consider it harmful to society to be deceitful and cultural immoral to peddle falsehoods, then vote for it. Fifthly, religions propagate fake questions and thereby distract attention from the pursuit of real understanding. When you reflect on the kinds of questions that religion regards as peculiarly its own and denies that rational thought can elucidate them, they turn out to be unsubstantiated extrapolations from human experience or fruits of the inability of a person to come to terms with the prospect of his own annihilation. If you consider it fruitful to consider questions for which there is no evidence, then vote against the motion. If instead you consider that attention should be confined to questions of existence for which there is actual evidence, then vote for the motion. We on this side, and I think I can speak for my colleagues, accept that religions often have a benign, comforting function, through, of course, the propagation of falsehood, and have inspired great art, at, of course, the cost of much blood. But we prefer honesty and its bedfellow rationality. So if you prefer to live in a society where the governance and personal deportment are founded on rational decision-making, on evidence, and not on culturally conditioned vagaries of sometimes conflicting faiths, then I urge you to vote for the motion. Religion is really not merely the opium of the people. It undeniably undermines the intellect and rationality, and thereby harms society at its core. I urge you to support the motion.